Most people think of angel food cake. They think of a white cake that is achingly dry and not very interesting and eaten only by people who don't want fat. Well, in one of my favorite baking books by Rose Levy Berenbaum, The Cake Bible, she has a chocolate lover's angel food cake that's absolutely wonderful. The downside of it is that you need 2 cups of egg whites. Fortunately, I made my son's wedding cake a few weeks ago, and that required a lot of egg yolks. So I saved the egg whites, I froze them, and since I'm having some company tomorrow, I decided it's a good opportunity to make the chocolate angel food cake. It's an easy cake to make, actually, but one of the daunting things about it is that you have to fold in egg whites, all right, which is really not a big deal, and I'll show you how to do it. What I did was I got my preliminary mixtures all set. I have my egg whites in the mixing bowl here with my balloon whisk inside. I have some cocoa powder that's been mixed with boiling water, whisked together, and vanilla added. And I have a mixture here of some sugar, salt, and sifted cake flour. And I have a little bit of cream of tartar in here, which is going to go into the egg whites. So that just as in a stir fry, you get everything ready to go. It's easy to get everything ready to go. The pan that's used for an angel food cake is an angel food cake pan, which of course makes sense. This is a 2-part pan with legs. And the reason that this separates and you have legs is that this is not greased at all. In fact, grease is the enemy of beating up egg whites, which is the one time that I make sure that there's not a scrap of grease left in the bowl, otherwise it will not beat up properly. And this is going to bake in here without being greased. It will rise, but when it's done, since the cells are fragile and will collapse, it's cooled upside down, balanced on a bottle, as I'll show you later when we get to that stage, until it's thoroughly cooled. Then it's turned around and you scrape the sides carefully in order to get the cake out. So that this is sort of a technique-intensive cake. The upside of it is that it is extremely low-fat. You're not adding any, and the cocoa, and I'm using a low-fat cocoa, is negligible. No additional grease is needed. And there's not an awful lot of sugar, so it comes out moist and delicious, and everyone who has it loves it. So, to get started, the first thing I'm going to do is to beat the egg whites just until they're frothy. Once they get frothy, which means it's sort of bubbly, then I'm going to add the cream of tartar, and I'll beat it until I get soft peaks. Once the soft peaks appear, I'm going to add the rest of my sugar and beat it until I have stiff peaks. So let's get the eggs going. This is just barely soft peaks. When I lift the beater, you start seeing very soft peaks forming. I'm going to beat it just a little bit more, and then I'm going to start adding the sugar. What I have here are stiffly beaten egg whites. All right, and these will hold their shape when I fold it in. So I'm going to get off all I can from my beater. I'm going to take about a cup of the beaten egg whites and dump it right on top of that mixture of cocoa and hot water and vanilla. And now I'm done with the mixer. And I'm going to take my mixture of flour, sugar, and salt. And I'm going to add it little by little. The recipe suggests in 1/4 cup amounts to the meringue, the beaten egg whites. So I'm sprinkling it over. Now, when it comes to folding, this is called folding, I find that this big beater works very nicely. I'll just show you the technique and then I'm going to put it back on the counter. I go down through the center and I come up the sides and over the top. I'm going to give it a 1/4 turn and I keep repeating it. I've tried it with other implements, with a balloon whisk and other kinds of spatulas, and I find that this just seems to work well for me. So, when you try it, you'll find what works well for you. There are specialized tools for this. This works just fine. And the aim here is not to get every little scrap in, but to get it reasonably well mixed, and then you add the addition. Alright, now here's the last of it. Fold it in just until it disappears. As well as you can see white against white. It's pretty good. Looks like this. It's not quite as high as it was before we touched it, but it's in pretty good shape. Now, here's the fun part. I dumped the egg whites on top of the cocoa, hot water, and vanilla mixture. I'm now mixing this together. The reason that we do this is to lighten the mixture and help it blend in. And almost every recipe that calls for folding something into beaten egg whites has you stir some of the egg whites into the mixture, whether it's a souffle or whatever. And even if you're not interested in making angel food cake, the technique of folding is really important. Alright, so you take this mixture that you've just lightened and you dump it on top. Let's get all of this good stuff out. This is what's going to flavor our cake. That nice chocolatey, nice dark cocoa flavor with just a little bit of vanilla to give it some added interest. I never experimented with making it with mocha, but I think I've seen some similar recipes based on this that do that. Alright, now, this is easier in a way because you can see when you're getting it, how it's mixed. And the aim is to get it uniform in color without deflating it too much. It's the same folding technique. I'm going to go down and over, and then I keep turning it. And little by little, you start seeing the dark streaks of chocolate disappearing, and everything will be a cocoa brown. It's pretty uniform in color. And I'm going to put it into the pan. Now, this is a little tricky because if you get air spaces in here, you're actually going to have spaces in your finished cake. These just bake up differently from the usual cakes that are leavened with baking powder. So I'm trying to do this evenly. You don't tap it because that would get rid of air spaces, get rid of the air in the batter. So that's not open to you, but there's a little extra thing that's done. So as I'm putting this in, I'm trying to make sure that it fills the spaces. Got this pretty well smoothed. Not waste any of this good stuff. And there's one final step to try to eliminate any air spaces. And take a thin-bladed spatula, I use an icing spatula, which is what I'm going to use to loosen it later. And it's suggested you just go through it gently to eliminate air spaces. And it's just about the way you'd like to see it. And I'm going to put it in the oven. And according to my recipe, it bakes about 40 minutes, which I found is pretty accurate. I'll test it with a cake tester. And then when it's done, I'll show you what it looks like and how we cool it. timer just went off, and I'm going to see if the cake is done. Well, it's certainly risen a bit, and the test for it is the same as you would do with most cakes. I use the skewer as a cake tester. I insert it, and it's come out dry. So I found that the 40 minutes really does work. Now, if I left it like this, it would collapse. So what we do is turn it upside down, which you normally wouldn't do with a regular cake, but remember we didn't grease anything. I'm using an old olive oil bottle because it has a narrow neck. Now what I'm going to do, and this looks sort of scary, but it really isn't, is to invert this on top, as though it were a lampshade. Notice nothing happens. It'll take about an hour and a half for it to cool thoroughly. It's an aluminum pan, so the heat should dissipate pretty quickly. And once it's thoroughly cool, then I'll take a thin-bladed spatula and we'll unmold it and we'll see how we did. So we're going to come back here in about an hour and a half when it's completely cool. The cake is now fully cool, and we're going to unmold it. This is a little tricky. It still has stuck, which it's supposed to do, so we have to loosen it. And I find that something like this, a thin-bladed spatula, this is actually an angled icing spatula, work well. You can use a knife with a thin blade, depending on what you have at hand. So I loosened it up around the center, and now the trick is going to be to work this. I'm going to work this around the sides, pressing against the sides once I loosen the top up, and trying to do as little damage as I can to the sides of the cake. Since this is typically not adorned, now if it looks a little messy it'll show, but it'll taste so good no one will really care. Alright, so now what I'm doing is working my way down, pressing against the side of the pan to loosen the cake from the pan. Alright, now we'll see how we do. Okay, so far so good. Pushing it up by the bottom. Okay. Alright, this actually, it's important to taste to make sure that it's good. It came out pretty well. I could have packed it better here. It's a little sloppy. But you know what? No one's really going to notice. And next time what I would do is pay more attention to the sides, to keep it good, to keep it nice and even. When it comes out really well, it all looks like this. The last thing to do, which I'm not going to do till tomorrow, is to take the spatula and loosen it right here. And then you flip it over. This becomes the bottom of the cake, which nobody will see. But since I want it refrigerated overnight, tastes good. I'm going to clean out the pan. I'll put this back in, cover it with plastic, and it will be all done. So, even though this is not aesthetically beautiful, it will be delicious. And actually, if you serve it in slices, no one will even notice. So I hope I've simplified this, and give this a try if you want a really good tasting, not too sweet, and extremely low-fat dessert. Thanks for watching.